Wyoming Territory, July 1889, Willa Thompson stepped off the stagecoach into a cloud of dust and disappointment, her heart pounding harder than the horses that had carried her across the plains. Her boots hit the dry ground outside the Sheridan Post Station, and all she saw was the back of a man walking away. "Mr. Langford," she called out, hope catching in her throat. The man stopped, turned, and gave her a look that made her stomach twist. He was clean-shaven, dressed sharp like the photograph he had sent her, but his eyes were colder than she remembered them described in his letters. "You are Willa?" he asked. "Yes," she said, brushing the dust off her skirt. "Willa Thompson." I thought you said you had funds," he interrupted, crossing his arms. "I never lied. I said I had little, but I could work. I'm a fast learner and I do not want a burden," he said flatly. "You do not even own your own trunk." His eyes landed on the small carpet bag she clutched to her side. "I was very clear in my expectations." Her cheeks burned. "I came all this way, then go back." He turned without another word, boots crunching over gravel. Willa stood frozen, the heat suddenly sharper against her skin. Around her, folks moved about like nothing had happened. No one stopped. No one cared that the man who promised her a new life had just left her with nothing but a bag of clothes and a heart torn open. She sat on the edge of the wooden platform, her gloved hands trembling as they clutched the bag to her chest. She had saved every penny working in a laundry back in Ohio, answered every letter with care, and now she was alone in a place where she knew no one. The sun dipped lower, brushing the hills with gold. Behind her, the stagecoach rumbled off, wheels creaking, dust lifting into the wind. She blinked against the sting in her eyes. "You lost, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and rough like creek stones shifting underwater. She turned. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, his shirt rolled up at the sleeves and dark with the day's work. His hair was sun-bleached at the edges, his jaw covered in a few days' worth of beard. But it was his eyes that made her pause, clear blue, steady, and not unkind. "I am not lost," she said, lifting her chin. "I was just left." He looked down the road where the man had gone, then back to her. "Mail order groom, supposed to be," she muttered. "You have anywhere to go," she swallowed hard. "No." He studied her a moment longer, then reached up to adjust the pickaxe slung across his back. "Name's Elias Jordan. I work the old King's Bluff mine east of here." She squinted. "You are a gold miner, still pull a bit out of the hills." "Enough to feed myself and the two I keep fed," she frowned. "Two, my kids. Violet is 8 and Victor is 6. Their mother passed 2 winters ago." "Oh," Willa murmured, unsure what else to say. She looked down. "I am sorry." He knelt in front of her and looked her straight in the face. "You got nowhere to go and I got a house that could use a woman's touch. Kids could use someone kind. I'm not offering charity. I am offering a place to rest, food on the table, and honest company." She blinked. "Why would you help me?" He stood. "Because I know what it is to be left behind. And because you look like someone who got dealt a rotten hand but came anyway." Willa hesitated. She had trusted once and been tossed aside, but something in Elias's voice made her want to try again. "All right," she said softly. They rode out together on his wagon, the road winding east into the hills. The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting the land in deep orange. She rode beside him in silence, the wind tugging at loose strands of hair around her face. His cabin sat nestled against a ridge, smoke trailing from the chimney. A little girl with a braid down her back came running out before the wagon even stopped. "Papa," she called, then saw Willa and slowed. A smaller boy appeared behind her, thumb in his mouth, eyes wide. "This is Miss Willa," Elias said. "She will be staying with us a while." Violet stepped forward, her eyes sharp. "Are you nice?" Willa crouched and smiled. "I sure try to be." Victor stayed clinging to his sister's side. Elias lifted him gently and settled him on his hip. "Come on in. Supper's about ready." Inside, the cabin was warm and worn, with hand-carved chairs around a long table and quilts folded neatly by the hearth. Willa helped set plates, her hands steadying as she moved between cupboard and stove. She watched Elias with the children, how he checked Violet's scraped knee, how he listened to Victor's whispered questions. That night, after the children were asleep, she stood by the window. Elias was outside, splitting kindling. The moonlight made his shoulders glow pale silver. When he came back in, he set the wood down and met her gaze. "You do not owe me anything," he said. "I know," she said, "but I want to help. I work hard." He nodded. "You are welcome here, Willa." She heard something else in his voice, something steady and quiet, not pity, not obligation. Just truth. And for the first time in days, her chest loosened a little. "Thank you," she said. He gave her a small nod before heading to his room. Willa slipped under the quilt in the small spare room he had offered her. Outside, the wind rustled the pines. Inside, the warmth of the fire and the memory of Elias's voice settled deep into her bones. She had come west with nothing. But maybe, just maybe, she had found something better than what she came looking for. The mornings came early in the hills east of Sheridan. Mist clung low to the ground, softening the rocks and brush, and the wind carried pine and wood smoke across the yard. Willa stepped out of the cabin with her sleeves rolled and her hair pinned back, a basket hooked over one arm. Her breath showed faint in the air despite the summer warmth, and the dew soaked the hem of her skirt as she moved toward the chicken coop. She paused at the gate. A gray hen blinked up at her from the perch, feathers ruffled from sleep. Willa reached in slow, fingers practiced from years of small work, and gathered the warm eggs into the basket. A quiet satisfaction settled into her chest, something she hadn't known she'd missed. Behind her, a screen door creaked. Violet padded out barefoot, a knitted shawl looped around her shoulders. "Do you want to carry them back?" Willa asked, holding out the basket. Violet weighed her with a long look, then took it with both hands. "Papa says you know how to cook corn mush without burning it." "I've made it enough times," Willa said, following her up the steps. Inside, Elias was tending the firebox beneath the stove. His flannel shirt was damp at the collar, and the smell of iron and sweat clung faintly to him. He straightened when he saw her and nodded once, then turned to wash his hands at the basin. "You sleep all right?" he asked, not glancing up. "I did," she said. "That mattress isn't new, but it's honest. Built it myself," he said, drying his hands on a cloth. "Used to creak worse, but I fixed the frame last spring." She stirred the pot on the stove and added a pinch of salt. Violet set the basket of eggs on the counter and leaned against the table, watching them both with a narrowed gaze that reminded Willa of a fox sizing up a trap. Victor wandered in, his curls flattened on one side, dragging a wooden horse by its frayed string. He climbed into a chair and laid his cheek on the table. "Do they eat like that every morning?" Willa asked with a glance toward the boy. "Only when they know it's chores day," Elias said. Willa cracked an egg into a pan. "And what does chores day mean?" Elias pulled a bucket from by the door. "Wood, fencing, mending the roof if the weather holds." "I can mend," she said. He paused, then nodded. "I'll show you the ladder after breakfast." They ate in quiet, the scrape of spoons and clink of tin mugs the only sounds between them. Afterward, Violet cleared the table without being asked, and Willa followed Elias outside. The ladder leaned against the north wall of the cabin. He steadied it with one hand while she climbed. From the roof, the land unrolled in every direction, brushland cut with dry creeks, timber groves, and beyond that, the faint blue rise of the bighorns. She knelt and began pulling the old nails from a loose shake, the sun beginning to warm the shingles beneath her knees. Below, Elias sawed through a split rail. His movements were slow but even, each cut deliberate. Willa worked in silence, replacing shakes with one stacked beside the chimney. She hadn't known she'd remember how her father had roofed their home with her beside him when she was 12, but her hands hadn't forgotten. Later, with the sun overhead, she climbed down with pitch-stained fingers and a throat dry from dust. "You hungry?" Elias asked, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "I could eat a whole loaf," she said. He gestured toward the cabin. "There's bread cooling on the sill. Violet made it." Willa stepped inside, sliced a heel from the loaf, and poured a tin cup of water. When she returned, Elias was sitting under the cottonwood, his eyes closed against the sun. She handed him the bread without a word and sat beside him on the bench. After a minute, he said, "You weren't meant for this." She looked over. "You don't know what I was meant for," he chewed, swallowed. "You walk like someone who's been pushed too many times. And you talk like someone who doesn't trust easy," she said. He gave a quiet grunt of agreement. "I don't." "Neither do I anymore," she said, her voice softer. They sat without speaking, the wind moving through the tall grass. Violet's laughter rang out from behind the barn, Victor chasing her with a stick held like a sword. "You want to stay," Elias said, not as a question. Willa folded her hands in her lap. "I want to earn a place. I don't want to be taken in out of pity." "I don't pity you," he said. "I see you working. I see how the kids look at you." She looked down at her hands. "They're good children. They've been quiet since their ma passed, but Violet asked me yesterday if you'd braid her hair like her mother used to." Willa blinked against the emotion that rose too fast. "I'd like that." He stood and stretched, his shadow falling over her. "Then stay if you want to." "I do," she said. He nodded once and returned to the fence line. Willa remained on the bench a while longer. The cottonwood leaves flickered in the breeze, casting dappled light across her lap. She watched Elias's back as he worked, steady and sure. She had come west expecting a husband and found instead a man who didn't speak promises but offered space. Not romance, not yet, but something firmer, something that could hold. And already it was beginning to take root. The next Sunday brought a soft rain that settled quiet over the hills, soaking the sun-baked earth and leaving the air thick with the scent of wet sage. Inside the cabin, the table had been cleared after breakfast, and Willa sat at the hearth with a pile of Violet's outgrown dresses in her lap, seams picked open and fabric folded neatly. The girl crouched beside her, concentrating as she looped thread through a bone needle. "Hold it like this," Willa said gently, guiding Violet's fingers. "Let the cloth rest against your thumb, that way it won't twist." Violet nodded, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth. "Mama tried to show me once, but I never finished anything." "Well, now's as good a time as any to try again." Across the room, Elias finished oiling the hinges on the back door. He stood slowly, rubbing his shoulder. "I'll ride as far as the creek bend, see if that old maple came down in the storm last week." "You'll take Victor?" Willa asked without looking up. "He's already got his boots on," Elias said, glancing toward the boy crouched by the fire, tying twine around a stick. "He's been itching to see the minnows again." The door closed behind them, and the hush that followed left only the sound of the rain tapping on the roof. Violet stitched in silence. Willa let her. "Did you know your mama long before they married?" Violet asked suddenly, not looking up. Willa paused mid-fold. "No, sweetheart, she was your mama, not mine." "Oh," Violet said, blinking. "I just thought maybe you'd known her too." "I didn't," Willa said carefully, "but I know what it is to miss someone who made things feel safe." Violet nodded, and her next stitch came smoother. By the time the men returned, Willa had hemmed a new pinafore from the softest pieces of a faded lavender dress, and Violet had managed a crooked but determined patch on her doll's apron. Victor held a cattail like a prize, and Elias's trousers were splattered with mud halfway to the knee. "We'll need to bring the axe tomorrow," he said, hanging his hat by the door. "That tree's leaning bad over the trail." Willa took the kettle from the hob and poured hot water into a basin. "You're soaked through." "Sit, I'll get a towel." As she moved past him, Elias caught her wrist lightly just for a moment. She stopped. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice low. She met his eyes. "About what part?" "All of it." She didn't pull away. "You gave me space to breathe, Elias." "That's more than anyone's done in a long while." He let go. That night, after the children were tucked beneath their quilts and the lanterns turned low, Willa sat by the fire with Elias across from her, a mug of coffee cooling between his palms. "Back in Ohio," she said, staring into the flames, "I worked in a laundry behind a butcher's house. The smoke from the meat got into everything. I couldn't scrub the smell out of my hair no matter how many times I washed it." Elias didn't speak. He just sipped, waiting. I used to dream of this, she went on. Not the hills or the wind, not even the cabin, just someone listening across the room, not expecting anything back. Elias set his mug down. You've got that now. She looked at him and saw the truth of it in the way he didn't look away. There was no pity there, no expectation. Just that same quiet steadiness he carried into every room. I want to stay, she said. You already are. The fire crackled low, and outside the rain had stopped. The air cooled and the scent of wet pine drifted through the chinked logs. Willa leaned back in her chair, and for the first time in years her shoulders eased without effort. Elias didn't reach for her. He didn't have to. Trust, she was learning, didn't always come in loud declarations or sudden sparks. Sometimes it came slow, like a creek carving its way through rock. Sometimes it came with a man who held a roof steady while you climbed, who noticed when you were cold and didn't ask why. And sometimes it came when you let yourself believe that you were worth staying for. The air turned sharper as August deepened. The sky stretched wider each day, and the wind that rolled down from the bighorns carried the first hints of autumn. Willa stood at the edge of the vegetable patch behind the cabin, dirt beneath her nails and sweat at her temples. She'd spent the morning thinning the carrots, knees in the soil, sleeves damp from dew. Now she was watching Elias hammer a new brace into the barn door. His shirt clung to his back in patches, and the rhythm of the hammer echoed steady across the yard. Elias, she called. It's too dry to leave that pile of straw by the shed. One spark and it'll go. He stopped mid-swing, glanced at the heap she was pointing to, then back at her. You're right, I'll move it after this. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the yard. I can do it now. He considered that, then nodded once. All right, just mind your back. I've carried heavier things than straw, she said, a faint smile tugging the edge of her mouth. He didn't answer, just returned to the hinge. Behind the shed, the straw was sun-bleached and brittle. Willa lifted armfuls into the wheelbarrow, the loose bits clinging to her skirts and sleeves. As she worked, a horse's hooves sounded faint on the road beyond the fence. She looked up. A rider was approaching, broad-shouldered, coat dusty from travel. He slowed as he neared the gate, then dismounted stiffly. His gelding snorted and tossed its head, stamping once before settling. You Elias Jordan? The man asked, voice rough from a dry throat. Elias stepped out from behind the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. I am. I'm looking for a place to board my horse for a few days, the man said. Name's Grady Harper. I came from Red Lodge, passed through Buffalo 2 nights back. Someone there said you had pasture. I've got grass and water, Elias said. But I don't run a stable. I'm not asking for a stable, Grady said, eyes flicking toward Willa. Just a spot with hay and a fence. Elias hesitated. What's your business here? Grady's jaw shifted. Looking for a man passed through 3 weeks ago. Took something that wasn't his. Elias nodded slowly. You're welcome to camp by the creek. There's shade and a trough for your horse. Grady looked at Willa again before leading his horse down the trail Elias pointed out. Once he was out of earshot, Elias turned to her. You see the way he looked at you? He asked. I did, she said, didn't care for it. If he gives you trouble, you come find me. I know, she said, but I can handle a look. Elias didn't press it. He just picked up the wheelbarrow and finished hauling the straw into the lean-to while she fetched water for the stock. That evening, Willa sat with Violet on the back step, brushing knots from the girl's hair. The sun had dropped behind the hills, casting the land in a soft blue light. Victor was curled up with a blanket near the hearth, and Elias leaned against the porch rail, oiling a lantern wick. Tell me about your mother, Willa said gently. Violet twisted the corner of her shawl. She used to hum when she cooked, never sang, not really. Just little tunes like she was talking to herself. Willa kept brushing, slow and steady. My mother used to do that when she sewed. It made the room feel warmer. Papa doesn't hum, Violet said. No, Willa said, glancing up at Elias, but he's solid. That counts for more, I think. Violet didn't answer, but she leaned back a little, letting Willa part her hair for a braid. Later, after the children were asleep and Elias had secured the barn, Willa stood by the window watching the moon rise over the ridge. Elias joined her, arms crossed loosely. "He's not just looking for a thief," Elias said. "I figured. Men like that don't ride this far for a stolen horse." She turned toward him. "Do you think he's dangerous?" "I think he's hiding something." Willa watched the silver light shift across the yard. "If trouble comes, we'll face it." He looked at her, quiet for a moment. She met his eyes. "Yes." He didn't say anything more, just reached out and touched her hand, rough fingers brushing her knuckles. She didn't move away. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full with something steady, something earned. And outside, the land held its breath. The next morning, Elias saddled the mule before sunrise. Willa found him tightening the cinch with a practiced hand, the barn lantern casting long shadows up the slats of the wall. "You're heading to town," she said, not asking. He nodded once. "Need to send a wire to the sheriff in Buffalo. That man Harper's story doesn't sit right." Willa stepped closer, arms folded against the chill. "What are you thinking? Too clean, too certain." "Men who come chasing thieves don't usually camp quiet and keep polite. They're either boiling or lying." She watched him loop the bridle over the mule's ears. "You want me to stay here?" "I'd rather you took the children to the creek pasture. Keep out of sight till I'm back." She didn't argue. "Be careful." He mounted with a groan and glanced back once before riding out. The sound of hooves faded quick in the morning stillness. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, Willa had a basket packed and Violet was helping Victor into his woolen jacket. They left the cabin by the back gate, cut through the tall grass, and followed the narrow path that led down to the cottonwoods. The pasture beside the creek was quiet, the water low and clear, and the grass thick enough to hide them if anyone came close. They spent the day tucked beneath the trees. Willa read aloud from the weather-worn Bible Elias kept on the mantel while Violet stitched a square of muslin and Victor slept curled against her side. The hours passed slow, the sky turning pale and then gold. Just before dusk, hoofbeats came from the ridge above. Willa crouched low, heart thudding. She caught sight of a rider silhouetted against the sky, and for a breath she couldn't tell who it was. But then Violet whispered, "It's Papa," and Willa exhaled. Elias dismounted at the edge of the pasture, his coat dusty and his face drawn. He walked to them, slow and heavy, and crouched beside her. "You were right to be wary," he said quietly. "Sheriff says Harper's no deputy. Rode with a rustler crew out of Montana, wanted in 3 counties. He's not tracking a thief, he's hiding." Willa's stomach clenched. "He's here to disappear," Elias nodded. "Sheriff's sending 2 men, but they won't arrive for 3 days. We need to keep things quiet and keep the children close." That night, Willa didn't sleep. She kept a candle burning low and sat by the window, watching the dark for movement. Elias sat on the opposite side of the room, rifle across his lap. When morning came, he said, "I'll speak to him." She stood. Not alone. He didn't argue. They found Harper near the creek, crouched by his horse. He looked up when they approached, and his hand drifted toward his belt. "No need," Elias said, voice calm. "I came to let you know Sheriff will be here by week's end. You'll want to be ready." Harper's eyes narrowed. "You wired." "I did." Harper stood slow. "You're making a mistake, Jordan. I'll take that chance." Harper looked at Willa then, something sharp behind the calm of his face. "You his wife," she lifted her chin. "I live here." He studied her a beat longer, then spat into the dirt. "You think you're safer with him. You think men like him don't have their own shadows." Willa didn't flinch. "I know exactly what kind of man he is." Harper's mouth tightened, but he said nothing more. He mounted and rode toward the ridge, not looking back. By evening, he was gone. 2 days later, the sheriff's men arrived. They followed Harper's tracks north past the timber line. There was no sign of him after that. No one was sorry. That night, with the door latched and the children asleep, Elias poured water into the basin and set it by the fire. Willa stood nearby, brushing out her braid. "You said once you dreamed of someone listening," he said, not looking up. "I've been thinking about that." She watched him dry his hands. "You listen more than you talk." He stepped closer. "I don't say things I don't mean. I know. He took her hands, calloused fingers curling around hers. I want you here, Willa, not just in the house. I want you with me, beside me. Her chest tightened, but it wasn't fear this time, it was something warmer. I've been with you since the day you steadied that ladder, she whispered. He leaned in, slow and sure, and pressed his forehead to hers. Then let's build something that lasts. They married beneath the cottonwoods at the creek's edge, with Violet holding a wildflower bouquet and Victor tugging shyly at Elias's coat. The preacher came up from town, and the neighbors brought pies and preserves. No one mentioned the past, only the good earth ahead of them. That winter, Willa taught Violet to make a pie crust that didn't crack, and Elias carved a cradle from pine for the child they hadn't expected but welcomed with full hearts. Victor gave up his thumb and took to reading, seated often in Willa's lap with the fire warming their feet. The cabin grew fuller, not with things but with sound soft laughter, singing at supper, the quiet hush of contentment that lingers when nothing is missing. And when the snow melted and the wind softened, Willa stood on the porch with her hand in Elias's, watching the sun rise over the ridge, the sky streaked with pink and gold. The land stretched wide before them, and behind them the home they'd tended together, piece by piece. They never spoke much about how it had begun with rejection, with loss, with uncertainty. Instead, they lived forward day by day into a life built not on promise but on presence. And in that, they found everything they'd ever needed.